Hey everyone, today we are learning how to pull a handle on a tabletop. So we're not doing it up in the air as a standard practice for pulling handles. We're going to do one on the table so it's nice and flat and school appropriate, especially if you teach middle school like I currently do right now. Okay, so here's some of the tools that we're going to need to pull and then attach our handle. Okay, so we need a big sponge like this. You can see it's pretty large. And then we need a half sponge. Both of these are wet and squeezed out. So you can see they're wet enough to get our canvas wet, but not so damp that they're dripping. Okay, we don't want dripping wet. Okay, then we want a piece of canvas, and I'm gonna pat this with some water. This is a trick to help keep our clay wet while we're working with it. And I need a big piece of clay that is loosely a large thick diameter coil. So this one's particularly large because I'm making a handle for this very large cup. And so we have to think that after I stretch this out, this handle has to be like an appropriate size for this cup, okay, which is a very large cup. So a large cup needs a large handle, a small cup needs a small handle. So that's what we're keeping in mind, is that this is the big chonker that we're going to be putting this handle onto. Okay, so this is our clay. Okay, we also are going to need slip, we need a fettling knife, we need a needle tool for scoring. So we have all those things ready to go. I usually have a bowl of water nearby and a smaller sponge in case I need it to smooth out my coil. So I have this coil that I'm going to just roll out so that it's got a nice long shape and doesn't have a bunch of divots in it. Okay, you want to start out with a good, reasonably good shaped coil. Okay, and I'm doing this on wet canvas so that my coil stays damp while I'm preparing it for becoming a handle. Okay, so I'm going to get my coil smoothed down the length. Okay, now one of the tricks that you want to use for getting a nice handle is that you want to take your coil and you're going to twist it. Okay, this twisting motion gives it a little more strength as we are working with our clay. So I'm going to twist it, and then I'm going to wipe my hands off so they're not sticky and dry them a little bit. And I'm going to roll this into a nice coil shape. So you have to be a little patient. And if it starts getting too damp, move into a drier part of your piece of canvas. So I'm going to scooch this over a little so I can get up here into this drier area, because it's just a teeny bit damper than I want it to be. More damp? I don't know if damper is a word. Okay, so I'm going to get that ready to go because we're going to be pulling a handle with this. Okay, so that's almost ready. I just want to get it nice uniform thickness and smooth down the length. Okay, so I'm going to end up not using this end. I can already tell. I'm going to wipe my hands off if they get too sticky. And what we want to do is we want to take this handle and we want it to become an oval. An oval shaped cross section on a handle is more comfortable to hold and doesn't slip and is better for functionality. We always want to have functionality in mind when we're making cups, mugs, bowls, anything that you use to eat from or eat with. You're always thinking about functionality. So this part of the coil I'm going to end up not using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my damp sponge, I'm going to set it down, and I'm going to put, I'm going to scooch down a little. There's a weird shadow right there. That's okay. We're just going to ignore it. I'm going to put my coil on this, and then I'm going to use this sponge to pull, to stretch the clay. Okay, so our goal is to stretch the clay. So I'm going to hold this up here, and I'm going to stretch the clay. So you can see I'm putting my fingers on either side of the coil, and I'm going to start stretching it. So stretch, 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 flip, because I'm going for an oval cross section. Stretch, stretch, stretch. Now, what this does is this aligns the molecules in the clay down the length of the handle. So this is going to give it more strength And it's also going to give it a nice oval shape. And you can see it's definitely starting to get an oval cross section. So I'm holding it at the top and I'm just pulling it down towards my body. Okay. Now you can see how much it's already stretched. It's quite a bit longer. Okay, so I'm going to keep going and I want to have a consistent shape. So sometimes I might have to stop and use my fingers down the sides. Okay, so I'm going to keep stretching it until I have a nice consistent section that I'm like, ooh, I like that section for the handle that I'm going to be making. So I'm going to keep flipping it 180 degrees so that I'm stretching it evenly down its length. Okay, so I think I'm pretty close. I know I don't need all of this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this part that I'm not using, and I'm going to put that in my plastic bag and save it for later. And you can see it has a nice oval cross section to it. And because we have a very large mug, we're making a very large handle. So I'm going to keep wiping it with sponges. And this is a great way to make a handle. A little bit of fuzz from our sponges on there. And our goal is to have it fairly even width down the length of it. Okay, now I'm going to dry my hands off, get them clean before I handle my mug, my slab mug body. Now, it is best to do this when the slab mug is somewhat leather hard. Okay, so I have this, and this is a little bit firmer, and this is a little bit more moist, right? So I'm gonna look at this and say, is this the size and shape that I am gonna need to do this handle? And I think it is. So I'm gonna set my mug over here. I think I'm gonna change the angle of my camera just a little. So I'm gonna shift this. Oh, we have a weird phone shadow going on. That's not ideal. Okay, so we're gonna come at an angle like this. There we go, that's a nice angle. So I'm gonna sit down, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the size that I have a handle going on here. Now, a couple of things I like to do is when I'm holding a mug, I like to have a finger width space from the top, so I'm not gonna attach it right at the very top. I'm gonna bring it down just a little bit below that. And I'm going to set aside the sponge, that sponge that I'm not using, and just have this one out, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut it, and I wanna cut it a little longer than I think it needs to be because I need to flare out the top of that, okay? So I'm putting away any clay that I don't use in a bag, of course, so that it stays damp, okay? Now, the next part has to be done with totally clean hands. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to be preparing the top of this, and you can see that nice cross section. I'm gonna be preparing the top of this to attach to my mug. Okay, so one of the things I wanna do is I wanna have dry hands. I wanna have a dry workspace that is clean and doesn't have any bits on it. Okay, so I'm gonna set this down. I think I'm gonna cut it a teeny bit shorter and smoother. And then, of course, all my tools need to also be clean. And my hands are feeling really sticky, so I'm gonna wipe them off a lot. Now, I have this attachment point, and we don't wanna attach it just straight onto it like that. What we wanna do is take this and flare it out. So I'm going to hold it in my hands just like this. And I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to gently and carefully make this a wider attachment point so that I'm creating more surface area to attach it to my mug. So I'm making that wider. So you can see that's a lot wider. I'm carefully holding it and trying to keep my hand dry so that I'm maintaining the profile of my handle, but making a wider flared area for it to stick down. Now, once I have that, I'm gonna figure out where's my attachment point. So So I'm looking at it and I think I want to attach it right here. Okay, so I'm going to pick up my needle tool and I'm going to mark out where I'm going to slip and score. So I want at least a finger width down from the top of the cup, and I'm just gonna kind of gently make some marks. Okay, so that's about where I need to score there. And then here in this nice soft clay, this is gonna accept deep scoring really quickly. I'm gonna make deepest scoring towards the middle of the handle, and then I'm gonna work my way out. Okay, so I'm gonna set this down on a sponge so that it maintains its shape. And then I'm going to slip and score on my mug. Okay, so with a clean hand, I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to slip and score my attachment point on my mug. And the mug is always going to be drier because we want this kind of leather hard so that it doesn't take finger marks or anything when we're attaching this. And now I'm going to put some slip on that. Okay, so I'm going to set that up. I'm going to get slip. And when we're slipping and scoring, we only slip and score one side. Sorry, we only slip one side. We score both sides always. So I'm just going to get a little bit of slip. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put that on my attachment point so that it's nice and slippy. Little ceramics pun, haha. Okay, so now I'm gonna clean off my hands. I want everything clean. Okay, messy hands means messy work. Clean hands means clean work. So I wiped off my hands. I dried them off. Dry, clean hands before I'm gonna do my next thing, which is I'm going to attach this to my mug. So I like to set a sponge right here so that there's somewhere for my handle to rest while I'm attaching. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push it towards the body of the mug. Okay, so because I want a good connection, I want those to really become attached. Okay, so I'm always supporting it towards the inside, and I'm getting that attachment really, really well smoothed, really well attached. Okay, and you can see I'm leaving it a finger width below the lip of my mug. So I'm keeping that really, really tidy as I'm attaching. So I want to be thinking about making a nice little ramp and make sure I'm pushing it enough that it's actually on there without distorting the shape of my handle too much. Okay, so I'm going to get a really smooth and clean connection there. I'm going to wipe my hands off. I'm going to dry them off, and then I'm going to do a good job blending that. Okay, because all of those surface textures really matter a lot. Okay, so nice connections. Now if I want to come back and put a little like sharp edge on that, I can, or I can blend it in completely, whatever I want to do. Okay, now once we have the top blended, we're going to turn it over on its side. I'm going to hold it in my hand while I blend this bottom part right here because I want all of that to also be nice. Okay, and I'm looking at anywhere where there's finger marks, fingerprints, anything, and I'm always doing it so that the handle kind of rests on the sponge that's right next to it. And I'm going to get this perfectly blended in so it looks like they were always connected. Okay, and it helps to use long motions with your hands because that's going to give you better surfaces. Now, once I feel like I've done a good job of attaching it, the next thing that I'm going to do is with clean, dry hands, I'm going to lift this up in the air and I'm going to just run my hands down the length of the handle just with my 2 fingers to smooth it. Make sure that that handle has a nice shape and feel. Okay, so long motions, long straight motions, make it nice and straight. Okay, so checking textures. I'm getting rid of any thumbprints I might have made or anything like that. So now I have my handle nicely attached at the top. I'm going to smooth it out even a little bit more. Okay, now I want to think about how and where I'm attaching it at the bottom. So before I do that, the thing I always do is I put my hand on it to feel, is that the right place? So I'm going to set this on here. I'm going to kind of imagine that I'm holding the cups. I'm going to get my hand in there and I'm going to measure, like, is that good finger space for this mug? Okay, and this mug, once again, is huge. Okay, so once I like the thickness of the handle, I'm going to figure out how do I want to attach it at the bottom. Do I want to do it like that? Do I want to cut and have it be more like an ear? Do I want to do something interesting with the bottom of this? Okay, and so I'm going to plan that before I attach it. Now, I think I want this to be kind of a short and high handle, so I'm going to set it down next to my sponge, and I'm going to cut it on the sponge with my finger underneath just to make it nice and stable. Now, you want to cut it longer than you think you need because you can always change it by making it shorter, but you can't add more back onto a pulled handle once it's trimmed. So now I'm going to look at that and say, do I like it? What do I want to do with this? Okay, and I think that I want about that size. Okay, I could go really high like that because I do like handles to look handmade when they're handmade. And so I like to do a finger above, 2 in the middle, and 1 below. And so I may make this a teeny bit longer so I can get 2 fingers in there, keeping in mind always that this clay shrinks. Okay, once I have that, I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom that I did with the top, which is hold it in my fist, flare it out. And this is going to shorten it a little bit. So I kind of had that in my mind. I'm going to shorten the handle a little bit by making this flared point because I'm taking that clay and I'm spreading it out, removing it from the edge of the handle thickness. Okay, so now I'm going to say, is that my spot? And before I attach it, I'm going to do the exact same things where I slip and score. Do I like the look of that? I think I want it lower, so make it a little bit lower. And then once this is attached, I can change the profile of this just by pushing it up a little bit. Okay, so I am happy with that. The other thing is you got to look at it this way and say, is that straight up and down on the midline of the mug? Right? And so I'm looking at that and I'm like, I think right there is the sweet spot. Okay, and so once I've made sure it's straight up and down on my mug, I'm going to do the exact same thing where I mark out exactly where I'm going to be slipping and scoring, and then I'm going to attach that point. Once I get all that done, I have a fully attached handle, and I can go in and add interesting features. I can add buttons, I can stamp things. Now, a really traditional additional feature that is added in a lot of handmade mugs that I want to show you, because you don't need to watch me slip and score the bottom one. That's exactly the same as the top one. Okay, so a really traditional feature to add is a little maker's mark kind of button. That's also a cool place to put your signature stamp if you have a cool signature stamp that you really like. Okay, so I'm just going to trim off some of my extra clay that I have from my handle, and I'm going to make a button that sits there. Okay, and so what that's going to look like is a circle of clay. It's about that wide, and I like to think of it as a thumb rest. Okay, so I'm going to get that nicely formed into the shape that I want. And you can put anything here that you like, but what I want to do is have it be a ridge on the top and flat towards the handle itself. So I'm going to take this circular shape that I've made, and with my clean hands and clean fingers, I'm going to shape that into a flatter base, like a wedge shape, so that when I put it on there, it's going to be more towards the top. Okay, so there's my little flat wedge. So I'm going to slip and score this on. Okay, I'm going to want it a little smaller than that. So I'm going to pull it down and change its shape and make it smaller before I put it on. So this is almost going to become a teardrop like shape before I attach it. Okay. So about like that. So I'm going to smooth my surfaces and my edges. Okay, now just like we do everything else, I'm going to slip and score this on. Score, 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 score. Score, score, score. Okay, now we're going to score this guy all the way up to the edges. And so it's these little details that make it really obvious that this is a handmade mug, right? If it's going to be handmade, it needs great craftsmanship, but it also needs great details that show that it's handmade. So I have my slip on there, my lid on my jar. Now, always clean hands. We're going to attach this on here. And that is chunkier than I want it to be. So before I put it on, I'm going to flatten it a little more, so it's not so huge. Okay, and then I'm going to redo some of my scoring. Score, score, score. And attach. Oh yeah, that's better. Okay, so now I'm going to push this on here so we have good attachment points. Push, push, push. I'm going to blend it in. Maybe shave a little of this off carefully. Always cleaning my hands as needed. Okay, so we're going to get that all nice and tidy and symmetrical with the handle, and then blend it in. Now, once I have it on there, I like to make sure that I have a good finger rest indentation on it for my thumb, because that's what I like to think of it as, is my thumb rest. Okay. So we're going to get a nice rounded form on there. Really intentional lip. Okay, so think about the details, right? So that's also adding substance and chunkiness to the top of that handle that I think we needed with a mug this big. So I'm going to get in here and make sure that it's got all the shape and texture that I want. And that is how we pull and attach a handle without doing it up in the air and having to deal with lots of giggling. Okay, so there we go. That's a handle for a mug, and I'll go ahead and slip and score this bottom piece on. And then when I'm done, this will be the profile of my nice and sturdy handle for my nice, gigantic, half-gallon size coffee cup. Okay, you guys, I hope that that is nice and clear. Make sure to do a good job slipping and scoring. And then when you're done attaching that, we can do a lot of distortion to the shape of the handle to get it the shape that we want. And that's how you do it. All right, and then we can go in and clean up any edges, any little bits that need tidying. So there's our handle.